Inmati. I am Ananthakrishnan. I contribute to Inmati and I'm a journalist based in Chennai. I'm happy to have this evening on this discussion T. Manivannan, who is an editor, multimedia and bilingual journalist, and who was an editor at the BBC for over 20 years. And Francois Gautier, editor-in-chief of La Revue de l'Inde, I hope I got that pronunciation right, and former political correspondent of Le Figaro in South Asia for 10 years, and also well-known author of many books on India. So this evening, we are going to be discussing the BBC's documentary series, 2 episodes of which have, I believe, come out so far, titled India, the Modi Question. So as we all know, the documentary has created waves in India, and with the government deciding not to allow it to be screened publicly, officially, and the links to that documentary online to be shared. So it has basically filtered through the internet to various parts of the country and been viewed by many people, screened by students and others, political activists at several forums. So this has created something of a media sensation, which is the kind of which we have not seen in quite a while now. So I hope we can go through some of the salient points in those 2 episodes of the documentary. And we can start with the idea that, the government's approach to it, was it actually productive in terms of what they decided to do with it, in terms of not allowing it to be publicly screened, and yet it's having been seen by so many people and discussed, become a media sensation. So was it a sort of positive outcome to the approach of the government? So I would like to start with perhaps Francois.
No, I think it's a mistake to have banned these BBC documentaries. First, as you said, because with internet you can always see them, and if you look, even now, if you look a little bit and search a little bit on the internet, you'll find links and be able to see them. And secondly, it reinforces that image that Mr. Modi is a dictator and that no freedom of expression is allowed in India. So from that point of view, I would say it's a mistake. And I would say that the media advisory that Mr. Modi has is the wrong kind of advisory, and they're not giving him the right input. So this is my restricting myself on that banning of the BBC documentaries.
Manivannan?
I think, what Francois said is, I can't disagree with him. In this day and age, and this digital age, banning anything is counterproductive. It's not going to be effective. So I mean, the same goes with books as well. If you ban a book, you get a PDF distributed via email and other things. So banning anything that is that you don't like is not exactly going to be effective, and it's not the democratic way of doing things.
So then, I mean, having the documentary having been seen by many people, there is naturally a discussion on some of the arguments made in it. The BBC documentary series actually relies, as I could see, I've seen both the episodes, of archival footage. And it says that for the first time, there is mention of an inquiry report which was initiated by the UK government after the riots in 2002. For the first time that this has been spoken about, the report, as a diplomatic cable, I think. And it also features interviews with some BJP members, journalists, and families of victims of violence in the Gujarat episode, as well as subsequently over the past 8 years. So what does the series actually add to what we already know, you think? Francois?
Well, the first part of the BBC, which mainly deals with Godhra, I have supported Mr. Modi a lot. It's a difficult discussion for me because at that time in 2002, when I was still a very active reporter, I supported Mr. Modi because I knew that the burning of the 58 pilgrims, Ayodhya pilgrims, in the Sabarmati Express by Muslim mob was real, and I knew that this was what triggered the pogrom against Muslim in Ahmedabad and other parts of Gujarat, from the Brahmins to the Dalits. The Gujaratis went down in the streets and rightly or wrongly, most probably wrongly, started killing Muslims right and left. Now, in my mind, in that time, I didn't think that Mr. Modi encouraged killing. The only question was whether he delayed the calling of the army for 24 hours or so. This was the only question in my mind. So I supported Mr. Modi because I felt that the burning of these 58 Hindus, was a very brutal. They were, burned like animals. And if my own wife or daughter had been killed in that way, I would also have gone down in the streets in anger. Rightfully or wrongfully, anger is never good, violence is never good, agreed. But at the same time, I couldn't pin the whole blame on Mr. Modi, and I still don't blame, I put the whole blame on Mr. Modi. He's not the one who went down and killed Muslims. It is the Gujarati themselves. And I think that the Godhra incident was a spark, that ignited a long time. This kind of pogroms do not happen in a day. They happen because there is some pent-up frustration or fury, and then there's a spark. And fire, there's a fire that erupts and it's difficult to control. So the only question was whether Mr. Modi waited for the army to intervene because he felt himself that the Muslims deserved to die for what they had done to the Ayodhya pilgrim. That was the only question. Now, again, I'm going to restrict myself to that. We'll come later to the second part of the BBC about Kashmir and about what I feel about Mr. Modi today. That's another matter. So I give you back the microphone.
Okay, Mani, do you think the documentary added to what we already know about what happened?
Sadly, no. If you had been a follower of Indian politics for the past 20 years, you would have read most of what was there in the documentary in one reportage or another. The documentary was pegged to the discovery, quote unquote, of this UK government report, which was transmitted to the UK government through possibly a diplomatic cable. That's the only new thing which we know. But these kind of reports from either the consular officials or the foreign government's own efforts, mostly through consular investigations. These happen in many countries, and these kind of reports go to their respective governments. In many instances, you have this WikiLeaks, which relied on this kind of confidential reportage. So yes, that is the only thing that we possibly did, know something anew from this documentary in the first part. Apart from that, what the first part tells you is not much. It's mostly what we have already known.
Yeah. I want to add that it's the timing also that makes it looks like a conspiracy, because now the G20 is happening. I'm in Pondicherry at the moment. Some of the delegates were in Pondicherry. In Auroville, I will talk a little bit about that later. And the timing of the release of these two documentaries just before the G20, knowing that Mr. Modi is so proud of India hosting the G20 for 1 year, and he's so keen at the moment to be seen as a respectable leader, whereas I think he's still universally hated for these Godhra riots. So the timing seems to me, leading to your title of a conspiracy to defame furthermore Mr. Modi when India is hosting the G20 events and delegates.
So, just to dwell on the question of whether the riots could have been stopped, as Francois was discussing a little while ago. So, throughout these, the first episode particularly, you see that there's a reference to the 3-day period. Many people speak about the 3-day period, whether it was sort of accidental, or it was thought of by somebody, because the action actually followed after 3 days, and you have several people on record saying that after 3 days the situation was brought under control. So I mean, this seems to be a sort of unusual thing that everybody speaks of a 3-day period. So do you think that that represents a failure on the part of the government to act much sooner?
But we saw during the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai that the special forces at that time, the Congress was in power. The special forces, from Delhi to Bombay took like 48 hours to reach Bombay. By that time, the damage had been done. So, I'm sure that Mr. Modi was angry at the Godhra, the burning of Sabati Express. But you also have to take into account the ineffectiveness of the Indian Special Force, of the army, of the transport, the difficulty of transporting troops to, I don't know, because from Delhi to Bombay, it would have been in matter of few hours. In any country in the world, the Taj Mahal is attacked, big hotels are attacked like they were with many Westerners. Within a few hours, within 2-3 hours, special forces have been there. In Mumbai, we saw, I was horrified myself. I was horrified that what an image it brings of India that special forces are not able to come to a scene of terrorism in a few hours' time from the capital Delhi to the economic capital Mumbai. So I wouldn't put the whole blame on Mr. Modi, knowing that, yes, there is a doubt, whereas he delayed the calling of the army to stop the riots, to bring order in the streets of Gujarat and Ahmedabad.
Mani, do you have any thoughts on what I found to be this thread of 3 days of violence?
1984, if you remember, anti-Sikh riots in Delhi took 3 days to subside. Congress, the ruling Congress, took a lot of blame for that. Nobody can absolve the ruling governments, whether it is the Congress government or the BJP government.
You're right, absolutely right.
Of blame in not being able to contain this kind of mass violence.
Absolutely.
At the earliest opportunity. We are not taking sides here. We're talking about the duty of the governments to save and protect lives, innocent lives. We can argue about until the cows come home about what exactly was the reason for the delay, but there was delay. And there were lots of
BBC, what is missing in the BBC and New York Times and Le Monde in my country and The Guardian is that either it is not mentioned that 58 Hindus were burned to death by a Muslim mob, or it is doubted that whether it was a Muslim mob, whether it was an accidental fire. So this, I find, also leads to a theory of conspiracy. Because we all know, and it's been proved, there have been so many inquiries, so many commissions of inquiry that prove that there were, and people were arrested, they went to jail, that there was a mob led by a local Congress councilman which attacked this train because it was coming from Ayodhya. And we know that Ayodhya and Babri Masjid, I covered Babri Masjid, the raising of the Babri Masjid when, for Le Figaro. Is such an explosive issue, particularly with Muslims, that they feel that the raising of that mosque, which was actually an empty mosque, but nevertheless was an insult to Islam. So the fact that they were coming from Ayodhya and they had some seva in Ayodhya provoked the anger and the fury of the Muslims, and this particular mob burned the train. So this is always omitted from most Western accounts. This is why Mr. Modi is so hated in the world. He doesn't understand today. In my country, in France, every newspaperman, every editor, every publisher, even when I try to write a biography of Mr. Modi and propose it to French editors, he's universally hated, but he thinks he's loved. This is one of the tragedies of Mr. Modi, that he doesn't understand the amount of hatred by the media, propagated mostly by the media, but also to governments, that has been fueled by the Godhra riots.
So on another issue of how, of course, I take Mani's point about everybody being responsible whenever something like this happens. The party or the government is in power is responsible. That's true. But in the case of what happened in Gujarat, from what we can see and what we know, the special investigative team, which was supervised by the court, actually had to rely on the same set of people who were actually in charge of, quelling the violence that took place in 2002. And therefore, many people doubt, whether the SIT was actually able to do a proper job, because they simply could not have got evidence from a third neutral source. So when the Supreme Court's amicus, in that case, he says that more could have been done, and he was trying to also say that there was a failure of responsibility and so on. Has the legal question been completely resolved, or has the documentary brought it up again that many questions, legal questions, remain unresolved in Gujarat?
But I think the doubt about Mr. Modi has never been resolved. Of course, he came to power on his second mandate, and he was re-elected in Gujarat 2-3 times after that. But what has happened in Godhra is something that is still festering. It's a wound that is festering and is plagued. It's been like a curse on Mr. Modi. Not in India, because there is a certain degree of nationalism and pride about what Mr. Modi has done so far. But abroad, this has never been resolved. The doubt has never been erased about Mr. Modi's roles in his riots, and it's a curse that even though he will be going to be re-elected in 2024, will continue to haunt him, I think.
Mani, do you think there is still some loose legal thread hanging after what happened 20 years ago?
It's very difficult to say, because the Supreme Court is the final, arbiter of these things, and Supreme Court seems to be, happy with whatever has happened. They have, said their word is the last word. But in public perception and in the domain of common sense, yes, the issue has not died down. There are questions there out in the field, and in politics also the controversies remain, because the questions, the issues about culpability, the issues about some of the issues raised by Francois. He mentioned about Godhra incident, which triggered. Now, there were 2 inquiries into that incident. One was constituted by the state government of the day. The second was constituted later, a few years later, by the then Railway Minister, Lalu Prasad Yadav. So both these inquiries came to diametrically opposite conclusions on what happened in Godhra. So we don't know yet finally what happened. There was an arson incident, and about 50 lives were lost. And who was responsible, we still do not know clearly. So like that, the post-Godhra riots in Gujarat, in every incident, there are unanswered questions, even though courts have ruled on some incidents. So the questions would not go away.
One of the points raised is about Haran Pandya, whose case is also mentioned in the documentary.
Yes.
Who was a member of the BJP and, who was...
the ministry. Yeah.
Yes, in the ministry. And he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. And, even Subramanian Swamy is seen saying that question was never really resolved.
See, I think it's Goebbels, that Hitler's propaganda minister, who said, if you negate the truth, repeatedly, then after some time, nobody knows where the truth and the lies are. And I think it happened for many things, but it's true for Godhra. If you keep saying that, there is no proof that 59 Hindus were burned like animals, it accidental fire or some, or they had kept some tea, they were boiling tea in the compartment, then it puts doubt in people's mind. But as a journalist, as I saw it, with my intuition, with my intelligence, it seemed to me like a truth that it happened, and this triggered a tremendous fury on the part of Hindus, and they went on a rampage. And again, you cannot say that Mr. Modi was ever heard to encourage this rampage and the riots. Whether he delayed in calling the army, knowing that justice was done by killing Muslims. Again, this will never be proved. He will never say himself, and Amit Shah, who probably knows, will never say himself. But Amit Shah did go to jail, though. So some justice was done, but negate the truth and keep on negating the truth, and nobody knows what the truth is anymore. But I think in India, a fair amount of people trust Mr. Modi on that matter, that there was a Sabarmati burning and that triggered the riots. And maybe or maybe not, Mr. Modi delayed in calling the army. And I think in India, the chapter is more or less closed, except for the Congress, the opposition, some of the journalists and intelligentsia like Ramachandra Guha and others. But I think in India, the chapter is closed. It's abroad that it has done Mr. Modi a lot of harm. And now he's an elected prime minister. After all, he's been elected by at least 400 to 500 million people. So he has gained some leverage and some respect. But the doubt remains abroad about his role in the Godhra riot. But it's it's not a very logical and based on facts doubt and hatred that is carried abroad by many of the Western governments and the NGOs in the United States and Muslim organizations, Christian organizations. It is not based on truth, I think.
I would like to just pick up on that. I mean, being a historian, of India, I would like to ask you, many people say that we have to move beyond Gujarat. It's now 20 years. And, as you said, there are so many different views about all this. But then, isn't it a sort of contradiction that we want to situate many things back in history and try to, seek some kind of restitution of, a certain age after so many centuries, while we don't really want to countenance what happened 20 years ago? Is that not a kind of contradiction?
No, I think the chapter is closed in India, as I said, but most of the history, I mean, I have written several books on Indian history, and there are many theories which are still the foundations of most history books, whether written by Indians or written by Westerners, like the Aryan invasion theory, like Ashoka, whether he converted to Buddhism because of the horror of Kalinga, like Alexander the Great, whether he had a triumphant entry into India, or whether he was wounded, and half defeated and had to retreat. So whether Mahatma Gandhi is floating around nowadays, Mahatma Gandhi is really the father of nation, or whether it was people like Sri Aurobindo and Tilak who actually started the real movement for independence. So Godhra is part of this. Godhra will go down in history as an unresolved mystery. But I think in India, most Indians, I would say 75% of India, excepting the Muslim minority and some of the intelligentsia, for them the chapter of Godhra is closed. That is why Mr. Modi has been re-elected with such a majority as Prime Minister for a second term. That is why BJP has won in Gujarat in the last 20 years and is winning many of the states in India. So I think in India the chapter is closed. But as far as Mr. Modi is concerned, it is a curse that he has to carry, because his image abroad has been damaged by Godhra. And so he has been trying to reach out to all these foreign leaders, and he's been trying to reach out in India to everybody, the Dalits, the Muslim, the Bollywood, so as to soften his image of a hard man, of the man of Godhra who, ruthlessly or cynically let Muslims be massacred. He's been desperately, I must say, trying to soften his image, and not successfully, because to my understanding and my experience, whenever I travel in France or elsewhere, he still carries that curse of Godhra. So yes, it is an unresolved mystery. And yes, I think it will go down as an unresolved mystery, because Mr. Modi will take it to his grave. That's secret.
Mani, one of the points that comes out in that documentary is an interview with Jill McGivering, way back in 2002, in which Mr. Modi is seen saying that one thing he would have liked to handle differently is the media. So I just try to relate it to what Francois has been saying about this thing having been put behind Indians, at least, if not abroad. So is it because he's able to handle the media better?
I think you, as a media man in India, should be able to respond to that particular point yourself. I think, by and large, Indian media is, I would say, very, very pliant. I remember, as you may also remember, the very famous Advani quote about the media's role in emergency. When they were asked to bend, they crawled. So yeah, I mean, how many investigative reports you have seen about this kind of incidents? BBC has just run a documentary which doesn't show throw enough new light on this, on the Gujarat thing. But has the Indian media done anything? Indian media was, in newspapers like Indian Express, were very, very, they did some exemplary job during emergency. Fight standing up to the pressure of Mrs. Gandhi. But what is the role of the Indian media now? I mean, I leave it to you. I don't want to say anything. I'm outside India.
So I'd like to, sorry, yeah, Francois, you want to say something?
No, about the media, the handling of Mr. Modi with the media. I think the accusation that Mr. Modi is a dictator, which I have long fought against, because I always felt that there's a great freedom of expression in India, that I'm a white man, I'm a non-Indian, non-Hindu, but I have lived in this country for a long time, and I've never been asked my papers in the street like it can happen in New York or Paris if you're from a different color or a different religion. I've traveled from Kanyakumari till Tawang in the Arunachal Pradesh, and I have with great freedom. But it is true that in the last 2-3 years, there has been a centralization of power in the hands of Mr. Modi and his PMO, and I hesitate to say, because I've defended the man for so long, but it is true that there is a hint of dictatorship that has come through, and the BBC hints at that, and they're not totally wrong about it. There is less press freedom. The media is more nationalist now, but it doesn't criticize Mr. Modi. And more than that, within the BJP party, nobody dares to raise the voice. After what happened to that spokesperson of the BJP, and recently when Mr. Modi said, don't say anything about Bollywood, whereas in the social media there is so much, about Bollywood, about the fact that Bollywood has portrayed Hindus in a bad light, for decades. Nobody in the BJP dares to raise the voice anymore. So Mr. Modi is an absolute, dictator might be a strong word, but yes, he controls everything, and he has a tight leash on the minister, he has a tight leash on the BJP. And there's also, I think, from his PMO, from the media cell of the PMO, I know the gentleman in charge of that cell, there's also a bit of a tight leash on the media, instruction given to the media. So yeah, I'm a little uneasy, even though I have been a defender of Mr. Modi for a long time, about the centralization of power in the hands of Mr. Modi and the PMO. Now, to come back to the BBC, I disagree with what they say about Godra, but the part where Mr. Modi is accused of, controlling everything, yes, there is a truth in it.
So on a slightly broader level, based on what we have seen in the 2 episodes of the documentary so far, you need a strong rule of law, and like you said, freedoms, many kinds of freedoms, including information and speech, and rule of law with the courts and the commercial institutions and so on. From what we have seen, these 2 episodes, what they show of a certain kind of polarization in the country, does it actually add to the India story that we have strong rule of law, and we can build the economy in a sustained way and stand up to China, which is what many people want us to do?
No, because the second part of the BBC deals, with Kashmir a lot, with Article 370, and I covered Kashmir extensively. I went to Kashmir as a tourist. I went to the Dal Lake and stayed on houseboats, and then as a journalist, I witnessed the rise of the militancy in those days with GKLF. There was the kidnapping of the daughter of that minister. I forgot his name. And I saw the first killing of the Kashmiri Pandit leaders in Srinagar, like Dr. Tiku was a surgeon, the director of Doordarshan. And then I was there when I had interviewed Benazir Bhutto earlier, and I was there when she gave a cry of Azad Kashmir, and the next Friday all the mosques asked Hindus to convert or flee or die. So I saw the exodus of the Kashmiri Hindus from the Valley of Kashmir. So when today the Kashmiri Muslims portray themselves as victims, not true, because they started a war against India in the name of Islam, and they were trained and armed and financed by Pakistan. In those days, I knew that they would go through the line of control, which is very porous. I spent a lot of time there. They would go to the Pakistan side of Kashmir, then they'd be trained in weapons and grenades and so on, given some money, and then pushed back into the line of control. In those days, the BBC said this is not true. I remember Mark Talley was the head of the BBC bureau in Delhi, and at that time there was not so much television. CNN was starting. There was only Doordarshan. So Mark Talley, whatever Mark Talley said was gold for us journalists, lesser journalists, whether we were Westerners or Indians. So Mark Talley kept saying it is not true that Pakistan is arming and financing and training these Kashmiri militants who started the war against India. But I knew it was true. It made sense. It was logical. Today, nobody disputes that fact. But when the BBC sees that Article 70 was an injustice, I witnessed these Kashmiri Hindus who had never done any violence against the Kashmiri Muslims. They were like brothers and sisters. They lived for generations in the Valley of Kashmir. They used to go to their houses for Eid. Hindus, good people, weak but good people. So when they were chased out for no other reason that they belonged to another religion from the Valley of Kashmir, I was shocked. It was my opening as a journalist. I had all these cliches, but when I saw that, I was shocked. And then I saw also, because I traveled a lot, that though no Indian could come to Kashmir, especially the Valley of Kashmir, first because it was dangerous, and secondly because Mr. Nehru had made a law called Article 270, whereas nobody from outside, whether they were Indian from Tamil Nadu or from Delhi, could come and invest in the Valley of Kashmir, buy a house, start a business, buy land. But Kashmiri Muslims, they're all over India. They are taken the souvenir trade. They sell their carpets and papier-mâché and whatnot and drugs from Delhi to Chennai to Pondicherry. They're in Pondicherry and Auroville. They're there. They pay very high prices for the shops and they control the market. So Article 70 was an injustice because Indians couldn't go to Kashmir, but Kashmiris could come to India. So I think Mr. Modi said something which was wrong, right. And again, I'm defending Mr. Modi, so I may criticize him for other things, but again, I think that Article 70 was an injustice, and when he removed it, it was justice done. And two, Kashmiris are not martyrs. They started the war against India, and today they may cry, but they're the one who started the war. I don't think that India went out of its way to attack Kashmiri Muslims, to kill them. It is the Kashmiri Muslims, first with JLK, then later with the Mujahideen, which started killing Indians and Hindus, and so the army had to be called. And I think the Kashmiri problem is not going to be solved. Mr. Modi can keep on pouring, billions of rupees like the Congress did before him. But my experience is that the Kashmiri Muslims feel closer to Pakistan because of Islam than they feel to India and Hindus. So, the crux of the matter will never get solved. But the BBC did an injustice on Mr. Modi by saying that Article 70 was something wrongly done. I don't know if you agree with me, but I have covered Kashmir a lot, and I'm very clear about it.
So here, I have a question. Why are Kashmiri Hindus still unhappy after Article 370 is gone? And, they still are unhappy in Jammu. They're agitating in Jammu. And, the government is not able to solve that problem today. I mean, what they originally set out to do. I mean, even if I take what you say, your arguments, as an argument.
But see, Kashmir is a very complicated problem, and Indians themselves are ignorant about Kashmir. There's Ladakh, which has a majority of Buddhists, most of them followers of the Dalai Lama. Then there is Jammu. We used to have a strong Hindu majority, but it is dwindling today for several reasons, because they have moved out the Hindus, or they're scared, and there have been, on the outskirts of Jammu, on the border of Jammu, there have been a lot of attacks on Hindus. And then there's the Valley of Kashmir, where there is a Muslim majority, but there was in 1900 still 1 million Hindus in the census of 1900. And today, in the Valley of Kashmir itself, there probably are no Hindus left. So Pakistan always felt that Kashmir should have, in the logic of the partition, and they're not totally wrong, in the logic of partition, which Nehru and Gandhi accepted blindly, Kashmir should have gone to Pakistan, because it had a border, it was contiguous with Pakistan, the newly created Pakistan, and it also had a Muslim majority. So Pakistan went furious when the Maharaja Hari Singh opted to, after a lot of hesitations, to attach his state to India. So as you know, there have been three wars, four, if you count Kargil, fought about Kashmir. And as I said, I don't think the Kashmir problem can be solved. Tourism might start again, and Bollywood film might be shot in the Valley of Kashmir. It's quite beautiful, but ultimately the Kashmiri Muslim feel that we are not Indian. There are a few places in India where you talk to people, like Tripura or Kashmir, they say, no, we are not Indian. We're not Indian. So the Kashmiri Muslim feel that they're not Indians. So this, in my view, with my experience of covering Kashmir, I feel this is a problem that will, pursue, every government that comes, whether it is BJP or Congress, because it's extremely difficult to solve. But the Hindus are not happy because they can't go back to Valley of Kashmir. It's absolutely dangerous, and they would risk their lives to go back to the Valley of Kashmir, and their land and their house have long been taken. There has been no compensation. Of course, there is a strong family system in India, so the Kashmiri Hindus, somehow they resettled in different families, Delhi, or they went abroad. But they're unhappy because they can't go back. No government can bring them back unless. And when I was covering Kashmir already, the army was in fortresses in Srinagar. That was long ago, in the 90s and early 2000s. The army would not go out unless it was enforced in the streets of Srinagar or in the rest of the Valley of Kashmir, because already it was under siege. So it's a difficult problem, and Kashmiri Hindus are unhappy because they lost their homeland. They became refugees in their own country. You can say Palestinians are refugees, but the Kashmiri Hindus are refugees in their own country, within India. And this is something unique, which newspapers and media like the BBC forgot to highlight. From Mark Tully till today, we hear the woes of the Kashmiri Muslim, because it's true that the army has a heavy presence and it's a war. So war is not, you don't fight a war with gloves. But we don't hear the side of the Kashmiri Hindus who lost their house, their land, where they had been for generations. I think it's a heartbreaking story, and I understand their discontent.
Mani, would you agree with Francois that the BBC got it wrong?
On what?
On Article 370 and...
Look, Anant, the BBC Part 2, Episode 2 is not only or not exclusively about Kashmir. It's about a whole trend of, politics by the BJP government for the past few years. So it's about, majoritarian politics adopted by the BJP government. So in that, Article 370 is one instance which BBC tries to, illustrate. Then there are other issues, NRC,
yes,
CAA,
NRC, correct.
Yeah, and beef lynchings, a whole lot of issues they talk about in the second part. And they have sought the government's view. Government has refused to talk. to the BBC. Of course, they have spoken to a BJP spokesman. He's not a spokesman. He's a BJP MP, whatever, and he speaks for the BJP. He at least reflects the BJP's point of view. So there is, the so-called liberal intellectual view, and there is this BJP view, and it's up to you to decide what is right. It's not exactly BBC saying what government did was wrong on Kashmir. That's all I can see.
No, but there's also the other question that the UN has been offering to solve this problem. And India
That's
doesn't
not
like...
exactly part of the documentary here.
It's not. It's not part of the documentary, since Francois was discussing the wider issues. So, he said that the Kashmir issue cannot be solved easily, at least. So, I'm just putting it to you. I mean, maybe there are future episodes.
Look, in my view, there are no issues unsolvable. Northern Ireland was considered to be not so easily solvable, till 1998, when Tony Blair went there, the Good Friday Agreement. It is a different place now. So it's all about political will.
Now, the UN also has monitoring presence, which is under the agreement. It is
no, I'm not talking about UN. I'm talking about whether the issue can be solved or not.
Yeah. Francois, any thoughts on the role of the UN?
No, I mean, as you said, even when I was covering Kashmir, the UN had an office in Srinagar, and we used to go and see them. Other kind of okay, let's go and talk to them anyway. But we never felt that they were playing an important role. They were bypassed by the Indian government, but the Pakistan have better public relations than India. Actually, they're much better public. Even today, you can say that Mr. Modi and his media cell are not good public relations. They don't understand what is public. But the Pakistanis do, make friends with people, be friendly, bring out the point of view. If necessary, hire some high-level, PR agency like the Pakistanis do in the United States. But I stand by my point that the issue of Kashmir can only be solved by either a peaceful or a forceful reunification of Pakistan and India. This is what Shromido said in 1947, that the division of India on religious line was a grave mistake, and that as long as Pakistan and India were not reunited, India would know strife and problems and catastrophes, which have happened. There have been 4 wars, and Kashmir terrorism will rise again. There are cycles in terrorism, or in whatever you call it, militancy. But I would like to come back to the role of the BBC, because I listened to the BBC when I was a young journalist. I listened to the BBC because it was a credible voice, more than Doordarshan. When Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, the BBC was the first one to break the news. So we listened to. Today, I still look at the BBC on my app. I look at the BBC News because it's serious journalism. There are fantastic documentaries. But as far as BBC India is concerned, from Mark Tully, it has been a story of, people are thinking about Mr. Modi's media saying, oh, it is colonialism. But I don't think the young journalists of BBC who are working in London or in Delhi think about the past. There's a trend on the BBC to demean India. And I think it's been a fairly continuous trend that from Kashmir, when Mark Tully said that the Congress government was wrongly accusing Pakistan of fostering the militancy in Kashmir, till today, when the BBC documentaries are hinting that Mr. Modi is a barbarian and a butcher, the BBC has not been kind with India, and I don't know why. Because as I said, I do respect the BBC, and I think it's serious journalism. There have been some accusation that China is funding directly and indirectly some of the BBC outlets. I don't know about that, but for sure the BBC is kinder to China, which is not a democracy, which is not Western friendly, kinder to that president who just been re-elected for the 3rd time with a dictator. Then Mr. Modi, who's been elected, whatever you say about Mr. Modi, he's been elected twice democratically, and okay, whatever, there's a bit of a dictatorship, but India is still a free country where people can circulate freely, they can express their opinion. The BBC documentaries were banned, and I think it was a mistake. But nevertheless, India is a friendly country. It's a democracy. It's friendly towards the West. So why is the BBC much harder on Mr. Modi than it is on the Chinese president, who is himself a dictator, who has blood on his hands? The Tibetan Holocaust is something that I'm very fond of the Dalai Lama. And so these people are very ruthless. And even now, the way they are encroaching upon India and pretending to retreat and then pretending to negotiate and then encroaching somewhere else. And every time, whether it's the Congress or the BJP, they fall for it. So I feel that the BBC is very hard on India and Mr. Modi, and this is not right, because it's a very good media organ. It's very ancient, and it's been there for a long time. So they're very hard. They are unjust. They're unfair on Mr. Modi. Though I criticize Mr. Modi myself, but they're a bit unfair on Mr. Modi, and they're much kinder to the Chinese, who are much more ruthless and much more deadly than the Indians.
But I quite don't understand how they are kinder to the Chinese, because I believe that China doesn't like the BBC to be present there, and if I know, they have asked those people to leave at points.
But you see, when the Chinese president Xi Jinping was re-elected himself non-democratically, the BBC just put it as a matter of fact. Okay, this happened. We have no comment about it. But when Mr. Modi was re-elected democratically, the BBC put a stain on him that he's a dictator, he's a butcher. So I don't think this is very fair. I don't think it's very fair.
I don't know if Mani wants to say anything in response before we move to another question.
I have nothing to say. I just would like to say that BBC has not been unkind to India. BBC may have produced a documentary about Gujarat. That doesn't mean BBC is unkind to India. It's about India is at one level we appreciate India being democracy. That being a democracy involves being able to tolerate criticism and dissensions and different voices. That's all about it. And I don't think BBC has been comparatively kind to China. I don't think that there is any example anyone can give about BBC's attitude towards China being kinder than it has been towards India. That's all I would like to say.
I'd like to come to a comment made by the scholar Christophe Jaffrelot in the documentary, in which he says that the richer countries of the world are not giving priority to human rights in India for strategic reasons. They give it lower priority because they look at India as a sort of counterweight to China. So they find that the overall strategic balance, certain things can be, including human rights, can be, given lower priority. So, Francois, do you think, Jaffrelot has a point there?
No, Jaffrelot, he's made his life task to demonize Hindus. He's written 20 books, and half of them are to demonize Hindus. Now, how can you compare human rights in India with human rights in China? I mean, India never invaded another country. Okay, you can speak about Godhra, but apart from Godhra, India has no blood on its hands. Whether the Chinese, Mao killed at least 10 million of his own citizens. In Tibet, they killed 1 million directly and indirectly. They're very ruthless people. So I don't know how you can compare in a balance the human rights in India and China. As I said again, I live in India I'm married to an Indian, and I experience here a lot of freedom. When a Hindu like Amrita Anandamayi from Kerala opens an ashram in France, she faces accusation of being a sect. The village next to her ashram, creates a lot of problem. I think now it's kind of smoothed over, but in India, I'm associated with Auroville. Auroville has been functioning for 55 years with many Westerners. So there's a lot of freedom. The Hindu psyche is to accept different I'm married to a Hindu. She's a half Hindu, half Sikh. My father is a profound Catholic, so she goes to France. He wants to take her to church, and she sees no harm in going with him to church. But it's a one-way traffic, because in India, a Christian will not go to a temple. In whether a Hindu, like in Kashmir, they used to go to mosque, to Sufi mosque, but a Christian, Indian Christian will never go to a temple, Hindu temple, because it's a sin. For a Muslim, of course, will never step, because he feels that worshipping an image is something which is sacrilegious. So, I'm a defender of India and the Hindus because they are wonderful, tolerant people. And if you look, a good journalist doesn't take a small event and make it a whole. If you look at the entire history of India, we see that Hinduism is one religion that never invaded another country with a military force to impose its creed, whether Islam and Christianity use the force of their armies to impose their creed upon other people. Hinduism never did that. So, no, yes, I'm a defender of Hindus, and I'm not ashamed of it. And Mr. Modi was, an ardent defender of Hindus. Now, of course, he's the Prime Minister of India, and he has to moderate his views, and he's the Prime Minister of all Indians, whether they are Hindus or Muslims. But I think the Hindus are wonderful people, and it's been a one-way traffic. As I said, in Kashmir, they were very tolerant. They used to go to their Muslim brothers and sisters, but in return, they were killed and they were hounded out of their homeland. So, yes, it's a story of injustice, and yes, I do look at the BBC every day, and if you make a census of the stories they do on India the last 2 or 3 years, you will see that the majority of them are negative. There are very, very few stories that the BBC does nowadays on India which are positive. Most of them are negative. Most of them are critical. Most of them show India in a bad light. And Jafrolo has been an enemy of the Hindus for a long time. He hates my guts. I hate his guts. Unfortunately, he's funded by the French government, so whatever Jafrolo says, reaches the political and the bureaucratic sphere and the financial sphere. So he has more influence than me in France. Very unfortunate, because, as I said, he made his life task to demonize Hindus. Whether Hindus are good people, man. I mean, they're good people. Whether they are, they're good people, and the majority of this country is still Hindu. So, no, I feel the BBC has been very partial to India. And documentaries prove it again. And even though I criticize Mr. Modi now, these documentaries prove it again that they are at it to demonize the BJP, Mr. Modi, and the Hindus who have elected this party and this man to power, and democratically elected, which is not the case in China. There is no democracy in China. And we know that China, is claiming parts of India, is claiming Arunachal Pradesh, is claiming other parts of the world, Taiwan, and eventually they will get their way. But India is not like that. They're not forceful and ruthless and calculating in that way, fortunately.
Mani, your comments on India and human rights, as articulated by Jafrolo.
Yeah, I heard that comment, and basically the episode itself. There is this comment by Jack Straw, which answers that point. Straw says, breaking up with India was not at all on the table because of various issues like trade and economic relationships. So in spite of the damning report that the British government at that time received, they didn't act. Why? Because of economic relationships and trade issues. That's there in Mr. Straw's quote. I think that answers your question.
On the contrary, Straw advised Mr. Modi to leave Britain, and there's some comment on that because of the threat of an arrest there or an unresolved case.
I don't think Mr. Straw advised him. That the episode doesn't say that.
I mean, it's not there in the documentary. As a follow-up to the documentary, Mr. Straw spoke to another TV channel in which he makes comments about how he advised the Indian leader
I didn't see
not to visit at a particular time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Right. Yeah, go on.
No, so I mean, of course, nobody makes a point about China being a democracy. I mean, we all know that their system is different from ours. So that anyway is on the record, and it's a well-recognized fact. So I also like to ask about your final thoughts on actually the health of Indian democracy, based on the sort of narrative that these two episodes of the documentary have, in terms of, just to put it in perspective, like the many things that we discussed. First, Gujarat, the riots, Godhra and the post-Godhra riots, and then afterwards the approach to the trial in many of the cases there, unresolved murders, which the documentaries speak about, and the J&K question, the CAA NRC question. So, and the beef question, cow protection, and 44 people having been lynched, and so on. What does all this? Where does all this put Indian democracy now? On the global stage. There is even a quote there which says that it is rated as partly free from having been free in 2014. This is what is found in the documentary.
No, again, it's a wonder traffic. The Congress dominated politics for a long, long decade. I mean, Rajiv Gandhi, after the assassination of his mother, was re-elected with an absolute majority. The Congress ruled most of the states in India for a long, long time. So now that the BJP has got the upper hand, the Congress is crying foul. But against the democracy, we see in Tamil Nadu that the DMK has been elected. It's a party that doesn't like Mr. Modi, doesn't like Hindi, doesn't like, So fine, they're elected and nobody's saying anything. We see that the Congress still manages to win some state like Himachal Pradesh. We see that Rahul Gandhi did a yatra, and I think it was quite good of him, quite courageous to walk, 20 kilometers a day and travel from Kanyakumari, now is in Kashmir. So yes, in spite of the fact that Mr. Modi has centralized a lot of power in his hand, which Mrs. Gandhi did before him, Rajiv Gandhi was an exception. He was a good man, but he was a little ignorant about the realities of India. But Narasimha Rao was a very tough man. I knew him a little bit. So yes, power is in Delhi. And as a journalist, that unless you're in Delhi, you're out of the power circle, you're out of the know-how. So this is one of the unfortunate leftovers of the British colonialism, is that Delhi was the power center, Delhi remained the power center. What the British put in place remains today, and the ministers still live in their bungalows and still have this VVIP system whereby they cut off from the people. But India remains a democracy, in my opinion, in spite of these flaws. And I see a bright future. And the moment the Indians feel that Mr. Modi either has abused his power, they will vote him out, as they voted out Indira Gandhi before, and so many others. So yes, I believe in Indian democracy. It is both a cliche that India is the greatest democracy in the world. It is a cliche, but it's also a truth. So yes, I'm positive about India. I think the democracy will survive. I think it's a little unfair that Muslims were invaders of this country, and very strong and sometimes violent invaders. Today are posing as martyrs. So I'm a little uneasy about that, because I have read a lot of history. I've studied a lot of Indian history. I did an exhibition on Aurangzeb, so I know what kind of rules he had, what kind of belief he had. He had a hard Sunni belief. He was a very pious man. He was a very rigorous man. But he was a hard Sunni, and he believed that image worship was sacrilegious. So he believed that Hindus were lesser subjects. So nothing much has changed. But yet, for the Muslim to say, "Oh, we are persecuted in Kashmir," Article 370 was unfortunate. The raising of Babri Masjid was, blot on democracy, whereas Muslims themselves raised thousands and thousands of Buddhist, Jain, and Hindu temples, and the remains are still seen today. And most of whether it's a Qutub Minar, whether it's a Krishna Mathura temple, is still there for everybody to see. So the fact that the BBC portrays Indian Muslims as persecuted is not only unfair but also bad journalism.
Mani, any concluding comments from you?
Well, on the democracy question.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's holding elections every 5 years alone doesn't constitute a democracy. You have a constitution which is one of the best in the world. Do you live up to the values of the constitution? Do you ensure that not only your own people, but every minority is protected. Every every section of the society feels protected, and the institutions that provide the guardrails for democracy, the independent institutions, the judiciary, the election commission, the media, all these, do they really enjoy independence? Are there enough checks and balances for the government so that one doesn't ride roughshod over the others? These are more important benchmarks for proving whether the country is really on stable democratic path, rather than holding elections every 5 years. That's quite symbolic, I would say.
What's the outlook on the series itself? If you could give us some inkling about how many more episodes we could expect.
I think it's a 2-part episode series. I don't think
it's-
there is anything more, unless there is something which I don't know. I think it's a 2-part series.
Okay. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for spending the evening and talking very freely about many of these points. So I thank you once again on behalf